It's been pretty much a week since we wrapped up the 2024 edition of the 50 Most Relevant, a countdown of players that I believe across SuperCoach, AFL Fantasy, and Dream Team, we needed to have a conversation about this preseason as we enter into a new year. But there's hundreds of players in the AFL, and let's be honest, across your AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach preseason, you've considered hundreds of players, let alone the thousands of variable options of how this might look in your 30-man starting squad. So 50 players and hundreds of options and thousands of variable makeups don't go in to a 50 most relevant, because let's be honest, there's more than 50 players. So in this episode, I wanted to give you 10 players that I think are unlucky to have missed the 50 most relevant for 2024. In no particular order, these are the names. James Jordan, brand new Sydney Swans player, has made his way up from the Melbourne Football Club, mid-forward eligible. And I think that's one of the really exciting parts for us as we consider him. It's twofold. One, a heavily impacted season last year with many vests of many colors. And that has meant significant price reduction and has enabled him to pick up DPP mid-forward status. We know he has shown at Melbourne that when he's in and given the right role, he's a reasonably good scorer. It was only a few years ago. He was a relatively popular cash cow option for us. And while he's not in at that same price range just yet, it is a little bit more inflated. We know he can score, and we know he's priced at a point across all of the formats that a 30, even potentially up to a 40 points per game of value upside is well within consideration. The reason he didn't make the 50, if you really want to know, I'm actually just not convinced he's best 22 yet. The beauty is the preseason can change that really fast. He is adaptable to playing outside on the wings, up through the high half forward, and even shown some skills through the center bounce. But I'm just not sure about how this Sydney midfield mix is going to go. No Mills. We've got Adams has thrown in the mix, and they do have a really dynamic new ruckman in Brodie Grundy. So for me, James Jordan, absolute or watch list candidate for us. Won't need much to make his way into my side, and already based on ownership, he's already in a bunch of teams because of, as I said, low price point in contrast to knowing what he can do in these full AFL games, and a really rubbish depth of forward line. And so everybody's looking for stuff. I like James Jordan as a prospect to consider, but didn't make the 50 because for me, I wasn't convinced and sold. He was in the best 22. Staying in the forward line, number 2 player that was unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant, Finlay McCrae. Yep. We got one McCrae into the 50. We didn't get both boys in there, but Finn, really nice price point for us in this forward line, pure forward, and certainly appears to be one of the players that under Craig McRae this year, they're really quite bullish to push into this midfield mix and really start to develop them for the future. As great as their long-term prospects certainly look with a young star like a Nick Dacos, they do have some aging guys that have rolled through this midfield over the past year or two. Crisp, Pendlebury, Sidebelton, and even a Taylor Adams, who has now departed. Certainly not a young core midfield group. And so it is really important for them to be able to get some young bodies through this midfield. And Finlay McCrae looks like he's going to get that. Why didn't he make the 50? Because we know he can score well. His points per minute from VFL, under 18s, and even the limited opportunities had at AFL level, we can see some scoring pathways, but why not? For me, he does feel like he's got a bit of a sub-risk concern around him. Again, that can get changed really easily through the preseason and practice and match simulation games. But he just didn't make the 50 when we were building it out in December. I just wasn't too sure there would be that pathway and narrative for him. But his off-season and preseason really does have him banging down the door. I think he's going to be a popular selection this year. But when we were building the list out, wasn't too sure. Number 3 of players unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant, like I said, I'm giving you 10 of them, was Tom Liberatore, a career best season across the formats, 19th ranked overall in SuperCoach, top 10 midfielder by average. He just does it all brilliantly. Inside clearance winner, which we know for SuperCoach, elite. Defensive tackles makes it really hard for players to get away from him. And all the attention goes to Marcus Bontempelli. So he's able to be freed up. And while he's certainly far from their best ball user, he's not a hack kick or anything like that. He's just a true blue workhorse midfielder that you love. So for SuperCoach, I'm surprised by his ownership levels and the lack of love for it, because he's not got any change in role coming through. 31 years of age, sure, on the older side of life, but he's one of two guys that's not changing. He and Bont's role isn't changing. And so, yes, you're not getting any quote unquote value. And so probably that's where he slides off people's radars, because they don't see upside. They're probably not feeling comfortable. He's a captain or vice captain option, as strong and consistent as he was, at least in SuperCoach for us last year. And I can understand it, but I think the lack of discussion around him has been a little bit disrespectful, just given how good he was and how prominent he was for us across all of the formats, but definitely in SuperCoach was an absolute weapon. He's unlucky to have missed, but if he did make it, it's probably would have been in the first week or two of the 50. I'm not sure that there's another gear to go up, and because of that, we're probably going to be able to look at a chance to get him a little bit cheaper in 2024. Next up, we're going to stay at the same club. Number 4, Caleb Daniel. He's mid-forward eligible for us, and really surprised that, as we've talked about what we don't like about the top end of this forward line, there's not been enough conversation about Caleb Daniel, even through whether it's been that midfield role, the wing role, and also through halfback. We have seen him give us multiple seasons of 90-plus averages, depending on the format that you play. Really consistent, one of their best ball users. And what has happened to the Bulldogs in the offseason? They've lost one of their best runners and one of their best ball users in Bailey Smith. Don't you think that potentially Caleb Daniel could just slide into that opportunity and role and become the beautiful link-up man through the middle of the ground? I think he absolutely could be. He's right in the mix. You're not paying for a heap of upside, although I think there is a little bit there. You're paying for a guy that feels really safe to be a top 10 forward for us, regardless of the DPPs that pop in our way. And so for me, I think Caleb Daniel really has been a miss from us as a community perspective, and the lack of conversation around it. The reason he didn't make the 50, politely, I just don't like the forwards this year. And because I don't like paying up for the top end of the forwards, I'd rather hunt the value. And it feels like for me in that sort of under $700,000 range in AFL fantasy and that sub $500,000 range in SuperCoach, there is a plethora of options. And so Daniel missed the 50, not because I don't think he'll be any good, but because I just don't like the forwards. And I actually really do quite like this value range to be able to just stock up on options, because I feel like we've got a bunch of really good ones. Next up, Elliot Yeo into the 50 most relevant. Plain and simple, the injury risk is high, but that's mitigated in part by his low price point. Two things that you need to see in the off season and through the preseason, and if they do or don't happen, it tells you whether you're on him or off. If he gets injured or has any setback at all this off season and this preseason, you fade your interest in Elliot Yeo. But it is risk mitigated by the fact that historically, we know he's 100-plus scoring prospect across the formats. He's defensive mid eligible, so there's nice versatility of squad and how we can work what we want to work. And given the multiple trades of every single week in AFL fantasy, given the best A team that we've got through multiple weeks, it minimizes the risk price point in rounds 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the injured impacted game that might come for Yo, impacting your scoring, because that just drops away. And so you can elevate your risk profile because of it. And in SuperCoach, you've now got an additional bunch of trades that you didn't have last year. So again, more trades means you can elevate your risk profile. And at his price point, my goodness me, Elliot Yeo screams bargain. And if you haven't looked at the defensive line just yet, or just a little thought for you, there's not a lot of great defensive cheap options that don't sit under the categorization of a key position defender. Phillips, Curtin, Hink, Gibcus. These are all key position players for their teams. And yes, they'll likely play a fair chunk of football. But again, key position defenders that are certainly not brimming with scoring for us across any other format. So for me, a player like an Elliot Yeo, who's a bit of a halfway house option, I really like. He could even be a pathway to a Nick Dacos. I don't mind it. So for me, I think Elliot needs a conversation. And if I really was honest, probably one of the biggest misses from me of not including them in the 50 most relevant. I think he's got a little bit more upside than maybe at least one or two of the guys that managed to sneak his way in. So probably one of the big misses from me. It's exciting to see the community, though, get around him, elevate that risk profile. We know the injury history is not great, but I think the combination of price point, best 18, and if we can get some ownership protection with an increased ownership, then I think that risk really doesn't come to bite us whatsoever. Halfway through the 10, what are you thinking? James Jordan, Finn McCrae, Tom Liberatore, Caleb Daniel, and Elliot Yeo. Any of those five you think are deserving to have missed the 50, or you think should have been that? You messed that up, MJ. Comment below and let me know. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, one, thanks for watching this video, but two, sort it out, jump on over, hit subscribe and turn the notifications on so that as soon as another piece of content drops from us, which is regularly throughout this preseason, you will be notified straight away. Go and do that now. So who else was unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant? Duke Newcomb, the Hawthorn midfielder, has shown in his first foray into the AFL level. Well, we knew from that first game that he played. Absolute defensive-minded beast, a tackling machine. This guy, when he wraps his arms around you, he will not let you get away. And what he's been able to do since that debut is show that he's not just a really good pressure player, but he's actually a strong contested ball winner and a really handy option through the way that Hawthorn like to play this midfield. Now, I think there is an element of risk around it, but I can understand it. And the risk around it is he really needs to, at his price point, kick in at least 10 to 15 points per game for it to really come off as a worthwhile selection. And I think you can build a pretty easy argument that there are guys that are a little bit cheaper than him, like another 50 to 100,000, if not further down, that are probably going to be in that comparable range of pushing the same level of potential. So I can understand why there's the attraction that people go, oh man, he could push that 100, 105 mid in AFL fantasy. He could push that 110 in SuperCoach. And my answer is, I see that. But to me, I think there might be some other options that personally I feel a little bit more comfortable getting, but he's unlucky to miss the 50, no doubt, because we know he can score. We know there's ceiling and we know he scores in multiple areas of the columns. And without a will day early on in the season, he's absolutely 100% the main man in there. And we know he thrives with those opportunities. Next up, this one hurts. Matt Crouch. He's unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant. I've been really bullish in the preseason that I think it's an indictment on the Crows if Matt Crouch is in their best 22 and Laird and Dawson are playing in the midfield alongside of him. I feel what that message is saying is that the Crows midfield kids, specifically Saligo, Rochelle and Pedler, are not ready to take on further levels of ownership through the midfield. And that's been my premise. It's not an anti-Matt Crouch. I'm not against Matt or Brad, both lovely guys, and spend a little bit of time with them in some media commitments over my radio background and career, and spent some time with them, and they're fantastic people. So no knocking the Crouch brothers as people, all right? But just don't think it's right for the Crows to have a Crouch, Laird, and Dawson as your three prominent midfield. That said, it looks like it's happening. Every bit of messaging you can hear from the club, all of the internal trials and the preseason matches that have happened to date, every messaging point is clearly saying Matt Crouch, Rory Laird, they are in the midfield, and Jordan Dawson, if any of them, is going to be the more versatile fix and move there. So to me, a little bit of humble pie, but happy to put it out there. It looks like Matt Crouch is playing through that midfield. And the reason that makes him in this listing is because Matt Crouch's points per minute and scoring is absolutely fantastic. And he's significant value for us based on what we know he can do. And so, yeah, if you're looking for that mid-price, upper mid-price range of a guy that you think can push that 100+ average, Well, Matt Kraut fits that bill because for years he has shown he can do that. He's tidied up his ball use a little bit. He is in a better side than he has been previously before that sort of 2016, 2017 era where he was at his peak. And I think it's even 2017, he made the All-Australian. So we know he's a really good footballer, and that's never been in question. But for me, if he's in the mids, he's going to score. I don't like him for draft for what it's worth, because I do see a world where the Crows fade away from him, and I'd rather get an asset like a Carl Amon, who's in a similar range that I know is best 22, and his worst case scenario is an 80s mid, whereas Matt Crouch's worst case scenario is not playing. But I get it. I see it. He's in a little bit of humble pie for me, but I'm happy to kind of take that because it just means the Crows are saying they don't think the kids are quite ready just yet. And if that's what they say, that's what they say. Speaking of Carl Amon, he's next in the 50 most relevant of players unlucky to miss anyway. Spent a bunch of time late last year across halfback, and every single time the club have played in intra-club match simulation types, where has Carl Amon played? Halfback, taking kick-ins in this role. That if you go back and look at some of those scoring rates over that last 5 or 6 games of the year, this is elite defensive premium numbers for us. And again, I can see why people are really, really excited about the prospects of Carl Amon, because they're picking him. The only little flag I'd say on it is don't pick him just because you think he might pick up DPP. Pick him because, in contrast to the other midfielders in this price range, you think he is equally as good a scoring and cash generation prospect, and the defensive potential gaining is just a little cherry on top that becomes the decider or the swayer. So that's the only thing for me. I think he's a really good pick. Got no problem with anybody jumping into Carl Amon, because if he holds down this role, man, it's going to stock up your defensive line a little bit handy well also then might open up Curtin, Dacos, Yeo, others that are getting this defensive midfield role. Windhager, I know a few are quite interested in as well. So it does open up some squad versatility for your upgrade cadence. So I think he's really good. Last 2 players of my 10 that were unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant. Colby McArdle. He has got that Harry Sheezel 2.0 vibes about him, doesn't he? Not just because he's at North Melbourne, not just because he's got that halfback distribution role, but because it's everything. Everything points to this is how, under an Alistair Clarkson coached regime, this is how they want to protect and build their players. Give them the opportunity to watch and allow the game to unfold. Allow them to use their skills where they're not as much under pressure coming out of half back and off the back line and rebounding up through the game, and letting them just ease into AFL football at a little bit of a different pace, see how they settle, and then absolutely release them into those higher up the ground roles, because we know Colby McArdle in time is going to become one of the best young midfielders in the competition. If the ascendancy trend that he's done throughout his junior career holds, we know he's going to be an absolute phenomenal pick for North Melbourne and just round out this midfield with speed, poise, and class beautifully. And for us that play AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach, just side note, if you had the number 1 pick in a redraft of a keeper league, so it's already been done, you're just in that yearly cycle, without knowing who's in the pool, I'd almost universally say Colby McArdle should be number 1. That's how highly I rate him, not just because he should pick up DPP through the year, but just because I think he's going to be the best scoring option with the best scoring role. So Colby McArdle, unlucky. I don't normally put cash cows in the 50 most relevant either. There's only a couple each year that kind of squeeze their way in. Harley Reid was one of them that managed to make his way in. It's a genuine cash cow. So for me, unlucky for Colby, but he's there. One more player left to go. I'm going to give you a few seconds. Can you guess who it is? While you're thinking about it, one, you can comment below and tell me who it is. If you haven't signed up to our Patreon supporter group, I'd encourage you to do so. All the details for it, you can find it in the description of this episode. There's a bunch of free rewards that come your way during the preseason and season proper. We're about to release our draft rankings. Then we have our cash cow guide. That's a full podcast, full article that is just exclusively for Patreons. And depending on your tier, there's a bunch of other rewards. If you've loved what you've got from us this preseason, encourage you to join our Patreon supporter group. All the details in the description of this episode. All right, one player left. Who is it? Nat Fyfe. I think he's unlucky. It's not just because of the injury history that's there, but it's twofold. One, forward eligible. Really important for us. We're not loving that top end paying up for it. I know some are really bullish on guys like a Flanders or a Bolton, or some based on ownership. Still Jackson McCrae really, really high. But Nat Fyfe, we just know there is supreme value if he's fit and if he's in the midfield. And at the moment, at time of recording, he's fit. And he's probably the fourth fiddle in that midfield behind Young, Sarong, and Brayshaw. So can he be the guy that gets us through that initial buy round block? Is he just a 6-7 week runner where we're actually going to use to flip him at the end of that buy round block and turn him into the forward that has just picked up DPP that we know we're going to want to have in our side? Is he going to be a premium forward for us at our price point? I don't think it's a consideration in AFL fantasy. SuperCoach, look, it's an opportunity for him for sure, because that format of the game certainly is more prevalently weighting the way he scores. So to me, I do like Nat Fyfe a lot in SuperCoach at this price point. I think he's under a ridiculous price. AFL fantasy is under 500K, so there's value there. There is a little bit of a sub risk, not a green, but more a red vest if the game's sewn up and they're trying to just manage Fyfe through the year. So that's probably the biggest flag for me of why he didn't make the 50 is just they don't want to lose this valuable asset early in the year. So a conservative approach I can see. But in terms of price point, forward and scoring prospect potential, you've got to consider him. Without at least ruling him out, you've got to at least consider him, because he, along with the other 9 players I've said, I think are unlucky to miss this year's 50 most relevant. But who would you put in? Is there some other guys that you're like, nah, MJ, I would have loved to have seen it? A Will Powell. I get that. Did you want to see a Brad Crouch in the mix? Maybe. Was it Josh Kelly? Did you think I absolutely lost the plot? I didn't push Josh Kelly in. I regret that life decision. Is it him? Is it a Cornelio? Is it a Finn Callahan? Okay, that's not just all Giants. But who was the player for you that you felt was the biggest miss that didn't get included in the 50 most relevant? You can comment below and let me know who and why. I can't wait to read your comments to find out who it is. And keep coming back to the channel every day or two. We are dropping new videos for you, some strategy episodes, as long as these observations and reflections and little just jabs in the arm to help you through this preseason. Footy is here and it's just weeks away from commencing the serious stuff. Opening round is not too far away. Hey, thanks for watching, and we can't wait to be having you back on the channel with us real soon.